So one of the most popular ways of making, especially making sculpture, is coil building. And that's pretty much as it sounds. So you can see what I've done is just take a piece of clay and try and open it up a little bit so it's nice and fairly even. And then I'm going to make this into a sausage. So I start in the middle, and it's just a very light rocking motion, and then I'm almost kind of splaying my hands out as I come along and sort of almost pulling. So I'm not pushing too much pressure downwards, because if I put pressure down, it flattens it, which isn't what we want. What we want is to try and make a nice, long, even sausage. Work out inconsistencies as I go along. And with clay, when you're making, you really need to try and make sure it doesn't really like stress. It likes to be even and consistent and not stressed out. So you can see that it's pretty much the same thickness all the way along. And what I want to do is create, as I'm building my piece up, I want to try and keep that thickness the same all the way around the work. If I have a very thick bit next to a very, very thin bit, something like this, so if my walls of my clay do something like that, this section is going to dry a lot quicker than this section. And as clay dries, it shrinks. So what will happen is that this section will shrink much quicker than this section, which will cause breaks. So what you want to try and do is keep it nice and even all the way up, as even as possible. So that the piece can dry nice and evenly, and you'll limit the possibility of your piece cracking. So when I'm making coil pots or coiled objects, I will tend to make quite a few of these coils so that I can build quite quickly. And as if you've watched the one on slab building, at this point it's very, very floppy. So what happens as you start to build up is that the weight of the clay will start to sag, so the work won't have a kind of won't have a sort of inbuilt stability. So what we do, if I just make a rough cylinder, is as I build up, I'll get to a certain point and then I'll have to stop because the walls of the piece will become unstable. And when I get to that point, I'll leave the bottom section to the air and drying, and then just keep the top section covered so that it remains nice and wet still. To join it, nice bit of pressure just to push them together. And you can just start going all the way up. So I would always put my coils on top of each other ever so slightly inwards, because clay wants to do this the whole time. It always wants to fall outwards. So to keep the shapes going upwards, you just need to bring it in ever so slightly. And the great thing about coil building is that if it's very organic, so if I want to change direction, all I have to do is start putting the coil on a different side. So if I want to start going out, I'll just start coiling it around the outside, and if I want to come in, I'll start coming on the inside, and if I want to change direction, I'll go out on one side and then in on the other. So I'm just, at the moment, just going to go straight up. And this is where the serrated kidneys come in. So this at the moment isn't attached to anything. So when we fire that, or when it dries, this will just be separate, and your piece won't have any kind of stability. So what you want to do is try and consolidate this surface. So I would first go down and then up with my fingers. And the idea with this is that you really, really want to try and get the clay really, really wedged together, mixed together. So if it's not a smoothing, I'm not doing this because that'll just come straight off again. What I'm doing is really getting my thumb right in there and really kind of taking wedges out and then coming back in again, pushing that material back up. You see? And I'm going to do that on both sides. And then once I've done that, I'm not going to be able to take that apart. Well, shouldn't be. So that, and then again on the inside. So this same motion. And I'm going to do that on the inside of it as well. So both the inside and the outside are completely flat. And again, this is where the serrated kidney comes in really well, because it takes away material. And again, consolidates the surface. So you get a nice cohesive surface. And again, I would do that on the inside as well. So if I want this surface, and I would just keep on going with that as high up as I want. And so if I want to smooth that off, these are where the different types of kidneys come in, and scrapers. So these flexible ones, they're sticky. So this isn't so bad. But you can see there's like a kind of a drag that sometimes happens with them like this, and it sticks onto here. Whereas with these metal ones, when it's very, very wet, these metal ones are much better because they don't stick as much, and again it's sort of compressing the clay, so you can see you can get a really, really lovely, nice, shiny, smooth surface. And there's kind of a misnomer with clay that in order to get a smooth surface, the best thing is to just continually add more water. But what happens when I add water to the surface is that I'm making this unstable. So what you're wanting to, like, I'm loosening the top surface of the clay, which means that apart from the fact that your piece is going to get much more wobbly if you're adding lots of water, which means you won't be able to build it up as quickly and it'll be more unstable. By adding water to the surface of it, you're destabilising this top surface. So the best thing to do is, if you want a really, really super smooth surface, is to use this metal kidney to begin with, just to smooth out these like really kind of deep tracks that you get from using the serrated kidney. Then leave it, and once it's drier, it gets to a point where it's just called leather hard. And once you get to that leather hard stage, the surface of the clay becomes very smooth, well, very hard, and then you can basically polish it with the kidney. So it's much better, if you want to have a smooth surface, to leave it to dry and then smooth it out once the clay gives it a bit of resistance, as opposed to just chucking loads and loads of water on it. So once I've got it to this point, I've used the serrated kidney in my fingers to do the inside and the outside, and then use this kidney to just smooth it up, smooth it out. You can maybe see, like, I want it to go straight upwards, and you can maybe see like it's sort of starting to bow slightly. ever so slightly. But you can see as well, it's very, very wobbly. So really what I want to do, and when you sort of come to kind of shape clay properly, once you get to a point where it sort of just doesn't feel very stable, I'll leave that now. But what I'll do first is put a little bit of cling film over the top of it. Get just a little bit of cling film and just wrap over that top edge. So what this does is that when clay dries, clay shrinks, which means that you only ever want to be adding more clay to itself. Like it will self-adhere, it's self-sticking and self-supporting. So there should be a point where I can make this as big as I want. It'll be hollow inside, but it'll still be supporting itself. Because as I build this up, this section will dry slightly, a bit enough for it to kind of hold its weight. But I want to try and keep this top level the same consistency as the new clay. So if I take new clay and try and put it onto a dry bit of clay, this clay, the drier clay, has already shrunk, which means that there's an inconsistency, so you won't be able to put them together. So when you're building up and doing lots of hand building, the best thing is to just make sure this top level is really nice and covered, and then you're leaving the rest of it open to the air. Then I'd leave that for, depending on how warm your room is, a few hours, couple of hours, and then you should be able, this should have started to stabilise and you should be able to start building up again. If I was going to leave this for 24 hours or any other length of time, you still don't want to get this very completely dry. So I would just leave it like this. Again, keep this top level really nice and wet and covered, really kind of well covered so that it doesn't get dry. Then I would just get the whole thing and just wrap it all up. And if that's airtight, I can leave that for anything up to a couple of weeks and it should be absolutely fine. You're basically just trapping all of the moisture of the clay inside and it should be absolutely fine. You just want to make sure that that top edge is covered, is double wrapped, and that there's no air coming in around the outside of it. So you could potentially put some tape or a bit of string or something around that bottom section as well, just to make sure it's nice and set. So if you want to leave something over the weekend, for instance, just do this, and then on Monday morning, whenever you can come back in, you should be able to open it up and it'll be absolutely fine and you can just start cracking on.